how are you? I like this podium. I'm really thrilled that you're here. This is a very special night. My name is Nicole Kraft, and I'm with the Sports and Society Initiative. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about what Sports and Society is and does, and all the wonderful reasons why we're glad you're here. And we hope you come to many other things. But we're very honored that Gene Smith has joined us to kind of kick off this incredibly important discussion that we're going to have tonight. This is an issue that is certainly important to all of us, very near and dear to all of our hearts, and it's been a focus for athletics, the idea of equality in athletics. And so welcome Gene. Gene's on a timeline, so I want to get him up here and welcome him and have him welcome you. So
thank you. Hello everyone, and thank all of you for being here this evening. Let me especially thank our panelists for being here, taking your time to be here. We got Canada, Pittsburgh, and Boston. Three of my favorite places. But thank you for being here, and we appreciate this opportunity to partner. And when you look at our athletic program, we try our best to partner with a lot of different academic units on campus. We do that with Brian Turner's operation and so many others. But this topic is so important in our society today. It's always been important, but it's even more important today, where we have an opportunity to create a platform for this discussion. But when you look at what's going on in our world and what's going on in our country, we need to pause and make sure we have these type of conversations. It's personal for me. I have a very diverse family. If I put up a picture of my family, you'd be like, okay, he's missing something. We just go ahead and figure it out. But the reality is this is really personal for me, as well as professional. I am fortunate and blessed to be here at The Ohio State University and work for 1,034 athletes from all around the world. And what's important for me is a number of different things we teach them, but the most important thing that we teach them is respect for others. Respect for others. This world, wherever you live, is about people and relationships. And the way you establish a great relationship is through trust, but that starts with respect. So regardless of where you're from, what your sexuality is, whether you're black, white, whatever, at the end of the day, people need to be respected. And so this is why this is so important to me, because I think that's important that we teach all of our young people that one important thing as they move through life. So I appreciate this opportunity to partner and have this chance to create this discussion. I am so sorry I do have to run. There's a event at the King Arts Center downtown that some of you, don't know if you're familiar with it. It's another area that's near and dear to my heart. They're having their big fundraiser down there, and my wife told me I had to write a check and I have to be there. Now, I appreciate all you people, but when the boss tells me I got to do something, I'm gone, I'm out, okay? It's simple, okay? So thank you so much, and Nicole, thank you for having me, and thank all you people.
Okay, well, as I mentioned, we are here with the Sports and Society Initiative, and to talk a little bit about this discussion as we're getting started, I'd like to welcome Trevon Logan, who is one of the founders of the Sports and Society Initiative, and is our executive director and does so many other things, and he's going to share with us a little bit of his thoughts.
So good evening. My name is Trevon Logan, and I'm the co-director of the Ohio State University Sports and Society Initiative. It's an honor to welcome you to tonight's conversation on equality in athletics, sports engagement, and the LGBTQ community. In its 3 short years of existence, SSI has united scholars across campus. We presented cutting-edge research across the globe, and we brought in internationally acclaimed experts to Ohio State and expose them to the Ohio State community. At SSI, we know that sports is so much more than the field of play. It is inherently and inevitably social behavior. We consume it, we discuss it, it excites us, and sometimes it gives us hope. After all, if the Cleveland Browns can win, anything is possible. Most important for SSI, sports is a window to a variety of social issues, ranging from discussions of power and labor markets to socioeconomic inequality, race, gender, and sexuality. SSI has achieved national and international recognition for our forums, which have ranged from professionalization of youth sports to the role of athletes in social justice activism. Tonight promises to be an illuminating a discussion of the role of sports in the LGBTQ equality movement. Before we begin, I do want to thank our generous donors, particularly Vince Doria, who has sponsored our forums, our advisory board, and our faculty advisory board for their ideas, their time, and their support. And I also want to thank all of you for coming tonight for what I know will be an amazing and informative event. And now I have the great pleasure to introduce Dr. Nicole Kraft, who is the other co-director of SSI, and who will introduce tonight's speakers. Nicole?
Well, it is a thrill that you're all here with me, and I'm extremely honored and excited to welcome our guests. We're going to start with an extraordinary story, and the person who's going to share that story with us is Harrison Brown. Harrison's played professional hockey for the Metropolitan Riveters of the National Women's Hockey League and the Buffalo Beauts. He was assigned female at birth, but has lived publicly as a man since 2016 and is one of the first openly transgender athletes in professional sport. He's now retired from hockey, but we are honored that he could be here to share his story and help us kind of understand exactly what the experiences are of someone who goes through this experience. So thank you. Welcome, Harrison.
All right. So what's the thing that Ohio State says? Is it O? O-H? Okay, there we go. All right. I'm Canadian, so I don't know this stuff. All right, so first of all, a huge thank you to Ohio State for having me. Having the opportunity to be here is a huge honor for me, and I'm very excited to be sharing my story with you all. Before I begin, I want to start out by sharing a quote with you and challenge you to remember it and keep it in the back of your mind throughout the short time that we have together. A wise man and an amazing leader named William Wallace once said, "Every man dies. Not every man really lives." And this is precisely what I'm here to talk to you about today, to share the exact moment that I truly started living. Now let's get started. So hi everyone, my name is Harrison Brown, and I was a professional ice hockey player in the National Women's Hockey League. And in typical hockey player fashion, I'm gonna show you all one of my highlights. Now, what I want you all to do for me is think in your mind the answer to this question. What did that play look like to you? I might not be a mind reader, but I think I can guess what's going through your head. Something like, honestly, Harrison, I'm not really sure the significance of that play. It just looked like a regular hockey goal to me. And if I was on the outside looking in, I'm sure I would have a similar answer. But I'm not on the outside looking in. So I know that in that moment, history was made. Barriers were broken, mindsets were challenged, and the game of women's hockey was changed. Let me reintroduce myself. My name is Harrison Brown, and I'm the first publicly out transgender athlete in professional sports. And that goal that I just showed you was the first time that any transgender athlete has had their chosen name and preferred pronouns announced on a professional team sports stage. And today I'm going to share my story with you all on how I unknowingly made history my second season playing for the NWHL. So 2 seasons ago, I came out publicly as transgender, and I did this through an ESPN article. And the moment that that article would be released would change my life forever. My identity was finally out for all to see. I was Harrison for the first time to not just my friends and my family, but to everyone. But this process didn't just happen overnight. I didn't just wake up one morning and think, hey, I'm transgender. I might as well tell the whole world now. I wish it was that easy. But I'd been socially transitioning for 4 years prior to that initial interview. I came out as transgender for the first time in my second year of university. I was playing Division I ice hockey at the University of Maine, and you could find me at the team roster as Haley Brown, the Canadian, finishing her sophomore year of college. Growing up, hockey was my entire life. I devoted a lot of time to the ice, and I quickly fell in love. I didn't realize at the time, but looking back on my childhood, hockey was very much an escape for me. You see, playing a sport gives you a certain title that's not gendered. You're an athlete, a hockey player. You're not a boy or a girl. And I think I found a lot of comfort in that. From the time period that I was at the rink or at the gym, I could get lost in a genderless world and be free from the stereotypes and gender roles that society burdened me with. But I knew eventually just being free in the sports world wouldn't be enough. Living as a woman was so hard my entire life. I always felt like I was in some ways invisible, like no one could truly see the real me. No one saw me for the boy or the man that I knew I was. And when I got to college and was able to live on my own for the first time and truly make my own decisions, that's when I knew I was meant to live my life as a man. So I started to come out to my teammates at the university, and they all had my back. They were my second family and really made it easy for me to live authentically, even if it was just in my hockey sphere. Together, my teammates and I, we tried out different masculine names to see which one would fit the best, and I slowly started to distance myself from my given name and go by male pronouns in my inner circle. As much as I wanted to be out to everyone at that time, teachers, students, family members, I simply wasn't ready. The fact that I was not physically transitioned yet made me very apprehensive to assert myself as a man when I simply didn't look or sound like one. A question that I received a lot was, why don't you just physically transition to alleviate that type of stress? But you see, playing sports at a high level makes your whole life revolve around it, making it very difficult to just give that sport up in order to transition. At the time, I was attending college on a scholarship. The only reason why I had that said scholarship was to play on the women's ice hockey team. Now, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, also known as the NCAA, states that you can identify as transgender while still participating in your sport, but you have to follow a few rules. And one of the rules for trans men playing on the women's side is that you cannot undergo hormone therapy, meaning I could not take testosterone, or I would violate rules and in turn lose my scholarship. It didn't make sense for me to give up the opportunity to be a college athlete, get an education for free just to transition. So I lived a double life for the remainder of my college career and into my first year playing professionally for the NWHL. I'd be Harrison, the trans man, to my friends, family, and teammates. But I'd be Haley, the gay woman, to the fans, public, and the media. As I gained more confidence asserting myself to more and more people as a trans man, the disconnect with my sporting identity and my identity to the outside world was becoming too great. It was weighing on my mind every time I would hear my birth name announced at the rink, see it on a roster, or read reports on me littered with female pronouns. It wasn't me. It was very conflicting to be an out transgender person, while I almost felt trapped to lie about who I was by the sport I love so much. Hockey was once my place of freedom, and now it was posing as a cage, where my gender identity had to fit into the women's side of the sport that I was playing. Now, I knew that I would not be able to compete as competitively if I simply switched to the male side. For one, the rules were different, and two, my size was clearly something that I could not overlook when deciding whether or not to continue playing women's hockey after college. I was stuck at a crossroad where I had to choose to either continue playing the sport that I loved and don the title of professional athlete for the rest of my life, or start living in a body that aligned with who I was inside. I'm not sure how many people ever have to make that choice in their lives, and I hope you never do. But ultimately, I chose to keep playing. My love for the sport was too great, and I was in my prime. I was 22 years old. I'm not sure how many athletes you hear of retiring at that age, but I'm sure there's not many. So I thought I could keep living my life the way that I had been, being myself in one aspect and being someone totally different in another. But the more that I would be misgendered, the less fulfilling my sport would become. Something needed to change. Unfortunately, I didn't really have anyone transgender in my life to ask advice or have anyone to look up to in the sport world. I had simply never seen an out transgender athlete participating in their sport before. I didn't even know the first steps to take in publicly coming out. But thankfully, I had many teammates to turn to when I needed support on figuring out how to come out officially. I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunity to explore my gender identity in a safe and welcoming environment. Women's hockey, and I feel women's sports in general, are very accepting of the LGBTQ community. By simply participating on a women's sports team, we are all part of a minority by default, and we've all experienced in some way or another the struggles in finding our place in society. And these experiences bond us and allow us to understand the concept of empathy. In my experiences playing women's sports, we were never defined on our sexual orientation or gender identity. We were only defined on our skill level, our character, and our work ethic. It didn't matter if you were gay, straight, transgender, bisexual, whatever. We were a family. Now, I have never played on a men's sports team before. I was always in a single-sex environment. I went to an all-girls school for my grade school experience, and I just always played female sports. And I'm not sure what type of acceptance or support I would have received had my situation been different. Would I have felt safe and welcome to come out as transgender or anything LGBTQ on a men's hockey team? I will never know. But I do know from the outside looking in that I can definitely sense the toxic masculinity that is ingrained within some male sports. Some men feel that they need to be aggressive, not show emotion, and hypersexualize and be attracted to women to fit the mold on what being a sportsman is. And in order for male sports to evolve in the way that women's sports have, in terms of acceptance of anything that breaks down normalization, a great example being the LGBTQ community, is to eliminate this skewed perception of what being a man is. The more that strong men are celebrated for promoting women's rights like David Beckham or Andy Murray, or celebrating the LGBTQ community like Braden Holtby, the more prevalent this behavior will be, and I'm sure we will see a culture shift soon to come. The more that strong men like them can set the examples for our young men growing up, the easier it is for everybody to leave toxic masculinity in the past and don a new age of what being a man truly means. And hopefully somebody someday playing on a men's hockey team can feel comfortable to come out to their teammates as gay, or even transgender, as I once did. Now, having the support of my teammates was everything that I needed to gain the confidence to come out publicly. Again, I really didn't have a blueprint on the proper protocol for these types of things, so I just simply sent an email out to the league's front office. I requested to have my name changed on the roster from Haley to Harrison, and have male pronouns used when referring to me on the ice, and in any press done by the NWHL. And right off the jump, the league had my back. They quickly changed my name on the roster and changed my pronouns on the league website, thus making my new identity public knowledge. Now, when I made the decision to come out publicly, I expected to have some backlash. But I knew that any of those viewpoints would have been out of ignorance, and that really had no impact on me. But what was pleasantly surprising was the amount of support that I actually would receive. And this support was extremely tangible. I was the fan vote into the NWHL All-Star Game, and I was also voted one of the fans' 3 stars of the season 2 years running. Those moments, I will never be able to express what they meant for me as a person to be embraced. And I can only imagine what having a transgender athlete supported and celebrated would mean for any young kid looking in, struggling with acceptance for who they are. They could look to my situation for a good, uplifting news story and not have their minds filled with the hate being broadcast daily. Now, being a symbol of hope was not something that I initially set out to be. I was only thinking of myself and what I need to do at the time to be the most authentic me. But what came out of living my truth and being so honest was more than I ever could have imagined. The most rewarding aspect of this past season was not winning a championship or anything to do with the media. It was hearing from other trans individuals, members of the LGBTQ community, parents of LGBTQ kids, and to hear them say that I was providing a source of strength for them and helping them deal with their own struggles. It was unbelievable. I was the person that I needed when I was younger. Now, by just being myself, I was saving and changing the lives of the vulnerable youth that needed it the most. I was blazing a trail that I didn't even know was there. I had no idea I was becoming the first of anything until a reporter asked me the question, how does it feel to be the first transgender athlete in professional team sports? And I remember my answer was, I had no idea I was becoming that. So I'm not sure how I feel. But by being the first of anything, guidelines must be implemented to make sure that your participation is included, and in some cases, legal. Yes, I was the first transgender athlete in professional hockey, but hopefully there'll be more after me. And that was the mindset that the NWHL had when allowing me to identify with the gender identity that I needed to, while still participating in their league. And thus the birth of yet another first. The first transgender policy in professional team sports, and I believe professional sports in general. If I had to choose a moment that was the proudest of my life so far, I would say that was it. Not only was I playing the sport that I loved as myself, I had just opened the door for other trans athletes to potentially play as well. I heard from so many trans individuals after the formation of this policy about their dreams to maybe one day play in the league themselves. It was overwhelming. Now, hearing from other trans people was so exciting for me. I didn't personally know many, so it was really nice to have something in common right off the bat with otherwise complete strangers. I could just feel the excitement that exuded for them sharing a little bit about their story with me, or sharing something as small as their chosen name with me. You see, for most people, a name is just something that's yours. It's so natural and it's just part of your identity. For example, have you ever had your name spelt wrong or mispronounced? It just doesn't feel like you. And for somebody that's transgender with a birth name that's either very masculine or very feminine, it can pose as a cage, a constant reminder that you're identified by something that you are not. And when I changed my name, it was one of the most uplifting things. It was a symbol of my freedom and the first step that I took in living my life as the man that I wanted to be. And going on with the theme on how important a name is, when you win a championship, you have your name etched onto a trophy. Being a champion is something that nobody can take away from you. But winning for me meant more than just a game or a season. Winning for me meant that Harrison was going to live on in sports forever. And not just the individual Harrison being me, but everything that I stood for as a transgender athlete. A reporter had asked me what was going through my mind after winning. And I said, the thing that I'm thinking about the most is that Harrison Brown is going to be etched onto that trophy. And I'm glad that I really opened the door for somebody else to get their chosen name on that trophy one day. Women's hockey, from the moment that I came out to the moment that I had my name written in silver, was changed. And the sporting community really had to adapt their thinking and acceptance of trans people now that they had one in their world. The NWHL sets a great example on how to properly accommodate an LGBTQ athlete. They understood the importance of language, the importance of listening to the needs of this said athlete, and they made sure that they didn't exclude anyone from participation. Yes, this league did create a policy, and that is amazing. But shouldn't it have been in place before? Shouldn't trans policies be required by every sport, at every level? It's no surprise that transgender people are out there, and we should be thought of proactively, not reactively. By being open myself, I'm hoping that trans policies are now going to become the norm, because I can guarantee that somebody has come before me and decided not to play the sport that they loved because they didn't feel included. And that's a shame. Sports teach so many life lessons, and the more that the sporting community can be progressive, the more that this can leak over into society. For example, people can take my story that started out in a sports vacuum and make it into something much bigger than sports. You see, putting a face to a story or a face to a type of person humanizes people and makes the unknown less scary. Again, it's no surprise that transgender people are out there, and we are gaining more and more courage to come out and live our lives the way that we want to. And this is a direct result of trans individuals in the entertainment and sport industry, like Laverne Cox, Chris Mosier, Janet Mock, coming out and being visible in the media. The more stories and the more faces we can put to the term transgender, the more mainstream it becomes, and the more mindsets we can challenge and change. That's why now I still take almost every interview request that I receive. If just one person hears my story, sees my face, and doesn't feel so uncertain about transgender people, then I'm doing my job. I think what makes my story so unique is that there was a time that I would be standing in front of you in a body that didn't align with who I was telling you I was. I am a man, but you might see a short-haired woman. And that was a problem, and one of the reasons why I initially intended to retire after my historical season. As much as I was able to participate and play my sport feeling like myself, whenever I would step out of the rink or the sporting world in general, I wouldn't be myself. You see, everyone in my little hockey space had a cheat sheet on what to call me and what pronouns to use. But as soon as I would be in an environment that didn't give me an introduction, I would go back to being seen as Haley, the gay woman, just trying to find her place in the world. See, prior to beginning my physical transition, every day that I was out in public, at some point I would be misgendered. I'd feel very lost trying to navigate which public bathrooms to use, and constantly feel the sting of titles like ma'am and miss. And after having a taste of what it was like to be gendered properly at the rink and on the internet, I became addicted to the feeling of finally being seen as who I was. Unfortunately, the world that we live in very rarely can see past the binaries of gender. There is no gray to them, only black and white, only man and woman. And I was often put into the category of woman based on my appearance and not my soul. And this was very draining. So I thought I'd had enough. I wanted to desperately go on testosterone, have top surgery, and leave hockey behind. So I let the league know that I intended to retire after the completion of the 2016-17 season. I was becoming more and more excited with the idea that I would start to blend into society and be seen as the man that I am by everyone, cheat sheet or not. So I booked top surgery. I went to my doctor to ask about testosterone and was getting everything in my life prepared for my physical transition. But the closer I became to the surgery date, the more attacks on the LGBTQ community would happen. The 2016-17 season was a very tough time period for anybody in our community. And as I read more tweets and saw more news articles, the more motivated I became to do something. Yes, I'm one person, but my story has touched many, and I would like to think that I have given people courage and strength with my message. And my message is to be proud and to be strong and to not change yourself to blend in or make the path easier, and to break down the constructs of society that hinder you and your ability to be free. And I felt that I let everyone down in that respect when I stated my hope to just simply blend in and not be different. But I am different, and I always will be. And that is something that I carry with pride. And I felt that my message was more important then than ever. And I felt that it was more powerful as an active athlete. So I made the decision to pull a Brett Favre and come out of retirement. And I did this to spread as much awareness as I could as an active athlete and as a pre-transition trans man. By asserting myself as a pre-transition trans man, I am normalizing the idea that you can be whatever you want to be in life as long as you believe in yourself. And there is a spectrum on gender identity that goes much deeper than just what you look like. If you are transgender, you are valid the second that that thought pops into your mind. You don't have to wait until you look the part. But it took me a long time to realize that. Even though I knew I was a man, I did not want to assert myself to others out of fear that they would reject the idea based solely on the fact that my voice hadn't dropped, and I still had breasts. So I pushed down all of my inner desires just to make everyone around me feel more comfortable. The second I stopped worrying about how my decisions would impact other people, I started to become much happier. By coming out and being authentic and also being so public with my story, I'm helping the fight to have transgender people treated just like any other person. Because frankly, we are just like any other person. There's so much ignorance and fear out there that we can't afford to be silent, to hide. We need to be open and we need to be proud. And I'm so thankful for each and every one of you out there today, whether you're part of the LGBTQ community or an ally. You are all so important in the fight for equal rights. The fight that everyone, no matter their sexual orientation or gender identity, is free to be who they want to be, love who they want to love. It is up to us to learn from each other and learn something new about the community every day. You are all necessary in the battle that we fight. And I know that it's hard to stand up for yourself and others. Confrontation is never an easy thing to go through, and is oftentimes uncomfortable. But what comes out of pushing through your comfort zone is a beautiful and rewarding experience. I can tell you that I wouldn't have had to go through the majority of the confrontation in my life that I've had if I simply did what I was told to do by society. If I just followed these imaginary rules that I was a woman and I was meant to end up marrying a man. But I can also tell you that I would not truly be living. But it took me a long time to get to this point. I can remember being so angry inside that I had to be different, that I had to go through this. It'd be so much easier if I could just be normal. But what is normal? Why does it matter what hairstyle you have, clothes you wear, or whose hand you choose to hold? I'll let you in on a little secret. It doesn't matter. The only thing that's holding you back from who you're meant to be is you. And the second I stopped worrying about what complete strangers would think if I cut my hair and shopped in the men's section, I became free. It does not matter what anybody thinks of you as long as you're a good person and you're true to who you are. We only get one shot at this crazy thing we call life, and there is no better way to live it than as yourself. Take heed of the wise words, every man dies, not every man really lives, and find out what really living means to you. Take risks, be brave, but most importantly, be you. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, well,
Snake that water.
we're going to take just a 2 or 3 minute break while we set things up for our additional guests to join us and really kind of dig a lot deeper into this topic. So we encourage you to get some food, get some coffee, and then come right back, and we will be ready to start. And we hope that you have some really great questions and comments to contribute, because this is a dialogue, not a lecture, and so we really want you all to be part of this. But a big round of applause for Harrison and his story. Give us 2 minutes. Well, continuing our conversation, we have invited truly an all-star cast here to talk with us about their experiences, their stories, what we can learn, how we can grow. So I'll start on the end and introduce Marshall Troxel. He is a field and policy organizer with Equality Ohio. He's a recent graduate of Ohio State University, go Bucks, where he received his bachelor's degree in neuroscience with a minor in global public health. Marshall joined Equality Ohio first as a volunteer and then as a fellow in 2017, and during that time he's worked to further Equality Ohio's efforts to pass statewide non-discrimination protections and to educate community members about the importance of such protections. Next to him, we are thrilled to welcome our very own Joey Bonanno, who is a former Ohio State gymnast, 2017 All-American in floor, and excelled in the gym and the classroom. He is a 3-time Ohio State Scholar Athlete, 3-time CGA First-Team All-American Scholar Athlete, 2-time academic All-Big Ten selection, and in 2018 was a Big Ten Distinguished Scholar. In 2017, Joey came out as openly gay and credited fellow gymnast Jake Martin with transforming the team culture at Ohio State and promoting an environment of acceptance and respect. He recently had an essay in The Athletic where he said, there's still much acceptance work to be done, and I'm quoting you, "I believe the fear of non-acceptance from one's family and team, along with the desire to protect the reputation of one's sport, is a driving force behind the hesitance of gay athletes to come out." We're, again, extremely honored to welcome from New York Ann Lieberman, who is here from Athlete Ally, she's a queer, intersectional feminist organizer, lifelong martial artist. Maybe she'll tell us more about that. She leads her organization's state-based and national LGBTQ rights efforts and mobilizes Athlete Ally ambassadors, sports teams, athletic institutions, and other partners to advance LGBTQ rights locally and globally. Prior to joining Athlete Ally, she led grant-making and advocacy in Southeast Asia for the American Jewish World Service as a program officer on the Sexual Health and Rights team. And then next to her is Alexis Venikanos, who also right here at Ohio State. She's in her 7th season at the helm of our women's lacrosse team and is a native of Yorktown, New York. She's been part of 4 NCAA titles as both a player and a coach, a total of 8 conference championships. She became head coach of the Canadian national team in 2011 and led them to the gold medal at the 2013 World Cup. And she's married to Sarah Taylor, a volunteer assistant coach for the Ohio State women's tennis program. They have 3 daughters, Olympia, and twins Theodora and Cecilia. We are very lucky to know Harrison already. So over here, rounding out our guests, is one of my favorite students of all time. This is Marcella Packard, who I'm honored to have taught. She is one of the greatest women's basketball players in Central Ohio and Ohio State history. She starred for Ohio State from 2004 to 2008, twice helped the USA women capture gold medals at international competition, was drafted into the WNBA by the Phoenix Mercury and later played across Europe, She served as Assistant Athletic Director at the Columbus School for Girls and is currently Associate District Athletic Director for Dayton Public Schools. She, along with her father, has been a respected referee across Ohio and lives in Cincinnati with her wife, Stephanie. And then our Master of Ceremonies here is Sean Richard, here from our athletic department. Sean, of course, has had a long history in sports here, most recently, gratefully for us. He's also worked at Colgate. He represents hockey, among other programs that we hear at Ohio State. But most important to our discussion, and I'm thrilled to be part of this experience with him, he is directing the Athlete Ally program that we have here at Ohio State, where we work within our athletic department to really advance the equality that we feel that all athletes and all students deserve here. So we have a round of applause for this.
Dr. Croft, thank you. First off, I want to thank everybody for being here. What a great crowd. And just being here shows your support for this community. Secondly, I'd like to thank all you for being here. I mean, some flew far, some drove short, some are right here in our backyard. I feel blessed to be part of this, so thank you all for allowing me to be part of this discussion. So, as Dr. Kraft said, we want this to be interactive, so if you have questions, please raise your hands and we'll kind of get to some of those questions. I'm going to kick it off first with, kind of go around and maybe each have some answers, but where do you feel like we stand now in terms of the LGBTQ acceptance in sports? Marshall, start with you.
Absolutely. I think, well, I just want to give a disclaimer that I don't have a ton of personal experience in sports. I'm really focused mostly on the legislative advocacy and policy advocacy side of issues that impact the LGBT community and specifically LGBT Ohioans, but with that caveat. So I want to sort of defer to the people who are actually in it and doing the sports side of it, who can speak to that culture specifically. As someone who does work within the LGBT community, though, I think the number of athletes, especially recently, who have come out and you were speaking to the importance of visibility and representation on the national stage as well as locally and statewide. The number of those individuals coming out and being supported by their teammates and by their sports institutions, I think, goes a long way towards creating a culture of inclusion that then empowers other members of sports teams who might be LGBT to also come out and be fully themselves, which is of critical importance if we want everyone to be able to compete on a level playing field and learn everything and gain everything that sports has to offer. So from sort of an outside of sports perspective, I think that does a lot to change hearts and minds and the culture around LGBT issues, and it also does a lot to mitigate the hostility that we oftentimes see across the state of Ohio and across the nation with respect to the LGBT community.
As Harrison was saying, I think representation is so important, and not just representation, but having straight allyship. And one thing I think we're making a lot of progress in is in our smaller sports. However, I think there needs to be more representation in our big five sports, so baseball, soccer, basketball, football, and other sports along those lines that get a big viewing. And if we have more straight allyship represented in these sports, that's going to have the power to influence society in a big way. And I think having that influence and having that allyship is going to be the key to changing our sports culture.
Absolutely. And I just want to echo everything that's been said about the importance and the power of visibility. And we've seen more athletes come out, more athletes speak out. I think when we also think about the amazing uptick in athlete activism we've seen in this country, not only on LGBTQ issues, but racial justice, that's also a really important part of this conversation too. I think for LGBTQ athletes, there are some very real numbers that I want to share with you. So the first is from an international study on homophobia in sport, and it is that over 80% of people globally have either witnessed or experienced homophobia in sport. Less than 1% of people feel that LGBTQ folks are accepted in sport, and in addition to that, 78% of people feel that if many of us sitting on this panel were to attend a sporting event as out athletes or out spectators, that it would not be a safe space for us. So those numbers are really staggering. And that's with very little data that we have about the experience of LGBTQ athletes. And that's another thing in terms of when we're talking about the state of sports. And I'm hoping we have some researchers and academics in the room. We need more data. And then the last piece I'll say, and Harrison, you mentioned this as well, which is incredibly important, is that we need more LGBTQ inclusive policies and practices that are proactive as opposed to reactive, and that are uniform.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think from my level, not being I guess these top 5 sports, being a lacrosse coach, I have a lot of conversations with college students, but now part of my job is actually recruitment of high schoolers. And maybe myself being an open coach, I'm actually having conversations now with females, and they're telling me about their girlfriends now and telling me about they're looking at Ohio State because we have this open community. And so I do think it is slowly, I don't know if it's trickling down, we see the big platform of the athletes and, we have these big 5 sports, but that wasn't a normal conversation. I would say even 2 years ago when I would talk to high schoolers on the phone, we were talking about not their relationships with their girlfriends. So I think that was, I think a small, obviously, but huge victory at the same time. So I definitely seen it at the lower levels, and it's been phenomenal to be part of that.
Yeah, I think playing hockey, being an athlete that plays hockey, especially women's hockey, the LGBTQ community has always been prevalent. Every time that I've played that sport, it's been about 50-50, LGBT, straight. So I've never had to have those hard conversations, but as I started to come out as trans, I started to meet more people and talk about things. I'm not naive to the fact that sports need to do better, but what I've seen has been very positive. I'm part of an organization called You Can Play. I'm an ambassador for them. And they host pride nights at baseball games, hockey games, and I've seen tons of hockey fans and hockey players donning pride tape, it's a rainbow colored tape, so you're basically flying a pride flag. And I have it on my stick every time I play, and to see NHLers have that and to see that all over rinks and to see kids and parents buying this tape, it just shows me that it's moving in the right direction. We still have work to do, but it's promising.
I think for me, coming from the basketball world, it was very normal in a sense. But in saying that, even when I was playing here, I wasn't necessarily out in the community. Of course, my teammates knew about it. But now I'm more focused on, from the athletic administrator perspective, is the student athletes I'm with right now. I'm very, very open when it comes to, me and my wife, and that I'm married. I don't play the pronoun game. I don't do that. I'm like she. I'm married, to a woman, and I found that being open shows them that, hey, if you are, you can be open as well. So my focus is more towards the kids and how I can help them out.
Thank you all. Joe, I'm going to go back to you specifically, and you talked about some of the smaller sports that have been great in this space. What sports do you specifically think have made progress, and which ones do you think are lacking the most on a big scale?
To talk about the small sports, I think even men's gymnastics has made so much progress. You would think, based on stereotypes, men's gymnastics would be this incredibly accepting environment due to the volume of LGBTQ athletes we've had in the past, but actually growing up, a lot of people don't know about men's gymnastics, so you constantly have to defend the reputation of it. You have to defend its stereotypes, and I found myself always afraid that I was going to hurt the reputation of the sport by being authentic. And I think over time, through representation and through spotlights on LGBTQ athletes, that's gotten so much better. So I think that's definitely a main small sport that's gone so much better. However, when you're looking at televised sports that are mainstream like football, you don't really see that representation. And I think not even LGBTQ representation would be helpful, but just allyship from straight people, I think would be just super beneficial to helping to break down those barriers and to help create a more positive environment in sports culture.
Harris, I'm going to look at you for this one. What do you think the biggest, you mentioned it a little bit in your keynote there, but what are the biggest challenges that this community faces?
About trans people in sports, yeah, I think the sport world in general is such a binary environment. It's segregated by male and female, and there's nothing in between. So it's very hard to navigate this limbo. And before I started my physical transition and I was an athlete, I played on a female sport, and every time somebody asked me that I didn't know, somebody asked me, what league do you play in? I would immediately get a lump in my throat because I had to say I play in the National Women's Hockey League. So I outed myself every time I talked about my sport, and it should be something that I was extremely proud of. Like this past year, when we win the championship, we get a cup, and we get to take turns having it around our house. So I was bringing it through Toronto, and I was walking through Toronto with it, and everybody would come up and be like, "What's this trophy?" A moment that should have been immense pride for me. I wanted to not have it. I didn't want this attention because I outed myself. So I think you're just caught in this world where it's really hard to navigate, and I don't know how to make it better because fairness in sport and everything like that, it's so ingrained, male, female. So it's going to be hard to break down those barriers and make it into an inclusive world for trans athletes, non-binary athletes. And I don't even know the first step to doing that. So that's kind of the biggest struggles, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Marshall, looking at you for this one, what are some specific challenges that Ohioans face, and maybe more specific challenges that students, faculty, staff, supporters of Ohio State face?
Yeah, so in terms of, I think, statewide challenges that LGBT people are experiencing right now, currently in Ohio, we don't have any statewide non-discrimination protections for LGBT people. So in our civil rights law that was, many of which were passed in the 1960s civil rights movement as an outcome of that, we do not yet have in the state of Ohio sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression included as protected classes within Ohio's civil rights code. At the national level, there aren't protections aside from some interpretations of sex discrimination through, for example, the EEOC. So we have a patchwork of protections and kind of porous protections that exist for LGBT people at the national level, and few protections that exist at the state, well, no protections at the state level, and then some city by city. So what this means is that if you're an LGBT person and say you're outed at work or you come out at work, you could be fired from your job simply for being LGBT identified or even perceived, and there's no relief or recourse that you can seek out as a result of that. Same thing in terms of housing, which is another basic necessity that people rely upon in order to live full, healthy lives. Housing can also be pulled out from under you. You can be denied a lease or evicted from your housing for being outed as trans, for coming out as gay. Someone discovers you as a same-sex partner, for instance, and you could have your lease terminated on those grounds alone and have no recourse. Similar in the areas of public accommodations. In each of these areas, workplace, housing, and public accommodations are areas where we decided during the civil rights movement that these were areas in which they constitute basic necessities that people need in order to live full lives. And it was because some populations are marginalized and discriminated against that we decided, well, we ought to intervene, and because it's in the public's best interest, to ensure that discrimination isn't keeping people from accessing something as basic as housing for their family or a job to pay the bills and to put food on the table. So I think that is one of the greatest challenges that Ohioans that are LGBT face currently. And we do have a legislative solution, I will just say, that has been proposed and continues to be proposed every year for over a decade now that would solve this problem of not having non-discrimination protections on the books in Ohio's revised code. The legislature has not ever advanced it to the point where it might stand a chance of passing. Currently the bill that we have, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk bills here, is that okay? Okay. Okay, good. Currently this bill is called House Bill 160, also known as the Ohio Fairness Act. And it would add those basic protections for LGBT people in the Civil Rights Code. They'd be enforced in the same way that all civil rights laws currently enforced for on the basis of race, age, and the other protected classes. So we are advocating pretty hard and forcefully for HB 160. It received, I will just say, over 150 pieces of supported testimony at the beginning of this year. So these are businesses, the Ohio Civil Rights Commission itself, the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, and the major chambers of commerce throughout Ohio, all indicating their support for it, in addition to faith leaders and many other constituencies. So there's a lot of, I think, support publicly for a bill like this. It's just a matter of convincing lawmakers that it's in their political best interest to, or just in Ohioans' best interest, to pass it. So just as an aside, if people are interested in that kind of advocacy, please talk to me afterwards. And so I think that's something that, hinders anyone just in general who's LGBT from getting ahead and from competing on an equal level playing field. And with regard to students, I mean, they rely on housing, they rely on public accommodations, even if they're in an institution like OSU, which is very affirming and inclusive in its policies and usually in its practices as well. They still have to, be a part of the public marketplace just like anyone else, and so they are vulnerable to discrimination that could happen there that they wouldn't be able to seek relief for. So I think that's an issue. Also, navigating the question of gender and how we create practices and also just physical facilities that accommodate people is a huge question. I think bathrooms and locker rooms are especially a space where this comes up. And I think that Ohio State, my understanding, has done a good job of, if someone comes forward and says this is my gender identity, and up until this point it has been misinterpreted or it was false essentially, and here are the pronouns I'd like to use. Ohio State, my understanding, is pretty good in terms of policy and practice of accommodating people and of treating them the way they want to be treated, and also giving them access to the appropriate facilities. Which I think is a source of major concern and fear and anxiety for athletes or anyone who's trying to navigate public spaces and knows that that's going to be a source of concern.
So I've warmed them up. I've got one more question, and then I'm turning to you. So get them ready. This is for anybody. Do men and women face different challenges in this space?
I would say yes, absolutely. I've made the comment before in different team settings and whatnot that I think gay male athletes have a lot harder time than female athletes. There's a lot of stereotypes and stigmas that come along with it, and it's not fair. But I definitely would say as a gay woman, it's a lot easier for me than it would be for a male.
Anybody else on that topic?
I have something to add on that. Most for trans women and trans men, I feel as a trans man, I have an easier time being viewed legitimate in the sport world versus a trans woman that has come out and wants to play on the women's side. I'm not seen as a threat. I can play on the women's side and I can play on the men's side. But some people view trans women as threats because they're not educated on the impact of hormones on the body and all that stuff. So it's difficult for me to see that when I'm celebrated and somebody in another situation might be frowned on. So I think there's definitely lots of discrimination. There's definitely lots of negative views on trans women, but I feel that it's starting to get a little bit better. There's a trans woman that just came out in the CWHL. Her name's Jessica Platt, and she's been welcomed. But that hasn't been the case for all trans women, so I think that needs to improve.
From a male perspective, I think one thing that's always hard to hear is gay slang and comments being made, and a lot of these comments amplify the notion that being gay makes you less and being gay is a sign of weakness. So as an elite athlete, you never want to hear that you're weak or something along those lines. So hearing those comments are always really challenging and something I think maybe more unique to the male side.
Questions, please.
I'm very new to learning about some of this stuff, so I'm sorry if I say anything wrong. I just kind of touching on what you were just talking about, how for you it would be kind of okay for you to play on the women's side or the man's side, whereas if you're a man, you're coming out as a woman, how that poses more challenges. And I've just been kind of sitting there thinking about it on the team sport versus competitive, if I'm thinking of the Olympics and stuff like that. How do you guys personally think trans should be handled in those things, just because, like you said, just because of the body is different from what's inside? How would we work with the challenges that come with that? Someone that obviously was born in the body of a man, but now they're a woman, and people have an issue with them competing with women because of their size. Like, how should we go about making those changes?
Yeah, definitely. And for the Olympics, the IOC has a policy that does incorporate for trans women and trans men. But I think kind of how you can talk about it to somebody that's not necessarily in the know of all that stuff to a general person, you talk about the discrepancies in all body types. I play in a league, I'm one of the smallest people in my league, and there's girls on my team that were 6 foot tall and 180 pounds. And that's just their God-given traits, and that's their competitive advantage. You don't bar somebody that's cisgender, you don't bar them based on their size, you don't bar them based on their strengths. So you shouldn't put those same barriers on somebody that's transgender. It's not fair. All humans are not equal. Everybody has a competitive advantage over somebody else, and just because they're transgender doesn't mean that it should bar them from a sport. That's the way that I would go by it.
That makes a lot of sense. I just want to
Yeah,
add
please.
something to that. And I think also, part of it is how we're even thinking about competitive advantage. And again, we're trapped in these excruciating binaries that we've constructed. And just because we constructed them doesn't make them any less real. I'm not suggesting that, but it's also important, like Harrison is saying, right, thinking about like the frameworks that we're using to even think about sports.
So before I continue, thank you. I just want to say, so I appreciate you asking that question and talking about it. So again, I would say in this panel, and please correct me if I misspeak. This is a tough space, and there's a lot of things that people feel like they can say wrong. Hopefully, this is a safe space tonight where don't not ask your question because you feel like you may ask it wrong. So am I okay to say that? Because I feel Ann and I had a conversation before, and I told her I'm kind of nervous. I don't want to say anything wrong moderating this panel. And again, it's a space where we're all here to learn. So again, I just thank you for saying that first off, because I don't want someone else to feel like they have to hide behind their question because they don't know how to ask it. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but thank you. Go ahead. Yeah.
So my brother goes to a very liberal high school. It's a private school and there's a lot of liberal ideology, and it's becoming more common for students to play on the team that they identify with. He's on the baseball team and there's a girl who joined the boys team. And he said a lot of students are uncomfortable with it and they don't like it and they roll their eyes, to quote him. So what role do you think coaches, or do you think they should have a role in mitigating the conflict, and are coaches supposed to act or teach the team in a way that would increase diversity and mitigating the conflict?
I guess as a coach on the panel, and I'll, echo what Sean is one of my, direct administrators. I think Gene Smith, just kind of said it. We're taught to definitely teach a sport, and put the ball in the back of the net in my sport, or land the jump, lack of better words. But we're also teaching that respect, and it's definitely a fine line, I think, for me sometimes when I'm supposed to win, but I also want to grow these these players I have on my team. So how I approach that one, I would say the team, and this is an opportunity for us to be inclusive and respect and give love. And not the traditional way of love. I had a leadership talk actually with my captains, and I talked about how you define leadership, and that's a big word in our sport. And I just think as long as you give love in different types of ways, that's how you show leadership. So how does it, with this is it's the same way, I would say. Just give respect, and you try to make every experience a learning experience, and how could we be helpful to them. So. I haven't had that, direct experience, and recently I think that's on my mind more, but that's how I think I would approach it. How would you approach that, Sean?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think to echo what Lex says is we ask our coaches to be educators. And again, they're here and they're paid to coach a sport, but they're also here to further along our student athlete's life. So again, I think that's an educational piece that we would hope our coaches would have conversations in, whether they're comfortable or not. And we like to think, as administration, we give our coaches a safe space to, maybe run that up the chain a little bit, and we can get them resources to help. So yeah, I think it would fall back on the coach. Again, as part of that being an educator, it's like a faculty staff member. That's who we are. It's what we do.
So, if you're familiar with the situation, I would love for some of you to give your opinion on the situation that unfolded with Michael Sam, who was the gay football player who came out right before the NFL draft and then was very much ostracized simply because he was a gay man.
Do you want to take that one?
I can start. That's a very good and tough question. I think there are certain aspects that may or may not have had entirely to do with his sexuality. In that particular context, I think that the NFL in general is a league that is not accepting and stamps out any kind of activism or statement that any of their players want to make. So I think, what we saw happen with Michael Sam and the kind of culture that has been built within most NFL teams is something that's continuing up until today. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts or comments on that.
I think it goes back to just the need for representation in those bigger sports. And I feel like representation is the biggest way to break down those barriers and start to normalize a new culture. And I don't know if the reasons he wasn't drafted was due to his sexuality, but I think it just shows as another example for an opportunity to have more representation to make progress.
I'm going to follow up a little bit on that because that was actually somewhat similar type question on my sheet. Is there seems to be some high profile athletes that have come out in the past, and it becomes immediate attention, stories, news, whatever it may be, but it seems to fade. What's truly the impact of that?
Yeah, I think for me, if I had seen a story of somebody, and it doesn't matter if it fades, if you see that, if somebody saw my story or I saw Chris Mosier's story, Chris Mosier is a transgender athlete for Team USA, seeing his story helped me see that I could see somebody tangible doing something, so then I can do it. So I think the importance of, it doesn't matter how long the story lasts or if it's just a flash in the pan, it can inspire a nation, it can inspire, even if it just inspires one person, the importance of having a platform like ESPN or having a platform like Outsports just shows that some kid reading that can feel inspired by that.
Yeah, I also think even though I think in the media environment, just in general, there's so much going on and attention is being split in so many different directions. So any time that like either national or even like local media attention can be captured by a story of an out LGBT athlete living openly and being celebrated by their team, and having the courage to do that. I think, I sort of mentioned this before, I think it chips away slowly but surely at cultures of homophobia and transphobia and just general hostility that we have around people who are of different sexual orientations and gender identities. So I think it does slow culture change work over time. And then it also has like very tangible, real impacts, I think, on people who are themselves LGBT and maybe have only told a few people or maybe told no one. And so I think for those people, and I can think of people in my personal life too, who either I knew or I heard about who had come out in a way that I thought was courageous and brave, and then demonstrated to me that I could do the same. And I think it has, I think, a real profound impact on individuals. And sometimes that's, an impact that doesn't result in them coming out until years later, but they can still trace their coming out story or journey to that story that they heard. So I think it does have an impact, but I mean, just in the chaos of the media today, everything feels like it's only around for like 2 seconds and you're on to the next thing, you know? So, yeah.
I think for me, one of the most healing things was seeing people like me and seeing people who had the same struggles as me being represented. And seeing someone who was like me and accomplishing what I wanted to accomplish was just huge for me. I remember I read Robbie Rogers' book. He was the first openly gay soccer player playing professionally. And just his story and what he went through just resonated with me so deeply. And I never forget those stories that impacted me. So I think these stories fade out in the media, but I think they have a huge impact on younger generations looking up to these people. And these people are giving kids someone to look up to, so.
We have a question back here.
My question was already partially addressed, but there's another part to it. It dealt with the culture in the NFL, but it also dealt with the CFL and the media. So the player that you're mentioning got cut, and I'm reading this in the news thinking, did it have anything to do with his talent, or is this because he came out? And then the CFL picked him up, but I live in Canada, the Canadian media just went crazy, and he ended up going home, and I think it was so much stress from the media, it had nothing to do with his talent as a football player, and it wasn't right. But I don't know that there was a counter piece or editorials or anything in the media that criticized them what they did. But it deals, Joey, what you were talking about before, there needs to be a cultural change at the league level, but the media needs to be more accepting too. And I don't know where it even starts to make the change.
Yeah, exactly. I think it needs to be a culture change in both aspects, both on how the media perceives these athletes, as well as how the sports teams themselves perceive them.
So Ann touched a little bit at the beginning when she mentioned something about how racial issues are kind of tied to the LGBT community. And we know that racism exists within the community. We also know that transphobia exists in the community. And so my question is for Harrison, and how do you experience that yourself in gay sports, and how gay athletes can better lift up trans athletes and support them? What advice do you give us as for that?
Yeah, so my teammates and the league as a whole really embraced me and really was like, no questions asked, we're gonna support you. All my teammates, whenever they would slip up or any of my coaches would accidentally say she or something, they would be like, sorry, and then just move on. So like it really just showed that they educated themselves on my experience. But for the most part, it was very positive, but I did have one experience on the ice. Somebody had said something to me on another team, and they said, there's no boys allowed in this league. And I was like horrified. It's like, what? I can't believe somebody would say that to me. And I went right to the league. I was like, you know what, this person said it. And they really went above and beyond and made sure that that's not tolerated at all. So just like cisgender people just standing up for a transgender person and somebody just saying like, I support you. Something as simple as like using your proper pronouns and the right name, or asking questions if you're not sure. That's a way that you can be a really great ally, is just saying that you've got that person's back no matter what, and we want you to feel as comfortable as you can. And that's exactly what the league did with me.
This is for talk about how you handle dialogue with Christians about their sexual orientation.
Well, for me, I grew up in a very Christian household. I was okay for a while saying, hey, I'll grow up, I'll marry a man, I'll have kids, and then I'll be with a woman one day once I've provided everything I'm supposed to do as a daughter. But, you know, and went through the counseling, and you're supposed to go to the pastor and all that. But eventually, you know, I just had to be like, you know, I have one life. I had friends, I had other teammates' parents who were very, very supportive, and I was able to talk to, so I think that was helpful. And, you know, it's tough. I think now, you know, you try to find, you know, religious place that you can go to and be comfortable. There's a lot more options nowadays, and they're being very open with that. But it's difficult, especially when you're raised in a certain household and, you know, being told that who you are is wrong. But I say it gets better as you get older, and you can find allies and support elsewhere.
I would also say too, just in terms of culture change, and also specifically talking to groups that maybe are concerned about LGBT people or the issues they're advocating for. I think education is so important, and creating, like we had sort of, and you had mentioned at the outset, creating a safe space where everyone in good faith can come together and recognize that these are complicated issues and people are going to slip up and make mistakes, and that we are all committed to having a conversation about this that educates each other without demonizing anyone who slips up or putting people on the spot. I think that is really where it's at, and of course that takes a long time and it takes a lot of conversations, but I think a lot of the concerns and anxieties that people have about the LGBT community has to do with a lack of firsthand exposure, or what they perceive to be lack of exposure, so maybe they don't know someone who's been out before, and also just has to do with a lack of kind of fundamental education, which isn't a bad thing on its face. We're exposed to certain ideas in schools and curriculum that doesn't oftentimes include LGBT identity. And so I think it's sort of important for us as institutions and as leaders working in this space to take it upon ourselves to have those baseline conversations with people, and to not shame them for not knowing everything, because I'm still learning things as I go, oftentimes in front of people. So I think it's just important that we all approach this in a good faith way, open up communication, sort of humanize each other, and that's needed now more than ever. And just in terms of all levels of our politics and even our civil discourse feels like it's breaking down a little bit too. And so I think just humanizing each other and giving space for basic education to take place is super important. That's how we get to those folks who aren't quite there yet.
And just to quickly add, one of the things that we try to do with some of our athlete ambassadors is lift up their identities as both queer athletes and people of faith, and have them tell their stories on our platform so that people see that you can be a person of faith and of strong faith. You can be an ally of strong faith and still be an ally to the queer community. You can be a queer person who is a strong Christian identity. And so what we've seen through some of that storytelling is a lot of really great feedback about how important it is to see those kinds of narratives so that faith communities and LGBTQ communities are not constantly pitted against one another.
Great question.
This is a question for those of you who are closer to Ohio State perhaps than not. In your personal opinion, do you sense that Ohio State University's campus is more accepting than the typical campus, less accepting than the typical campus, or about normal for this day and age?
In my personal experience as an athlete here at Ohio State, I've just sensed incredible acceptance from this university, and part of the main reason why I came here was just the environment. I came here on my trips and I've seen gay athletes being accepted by the team, and I just sensed that culture, and I sensed that it was a safe place to be. So from my experience, I just thought it was an incredible culture and something that I felt safe, and a culture I want to be a part of.
I would say above average. I worked at another public institution and a private, and they were both really, I think, proactive and accepting. But here, it's been open arms. My daughters were in Ohio State daycare. They talked about having moms and dads and single family, no parents. So, that was something that I wasn't expected, but I'm really glad that we had those conversations with my children and the peers in that age group. So some of my coworkers, my peers, and actually don't work at other universities that don't have an opening environment. Some of the southern schools and some private schools down south, they don't want to be, they were open their whole life and they didn't want to live a closed lifestyle working at other universities. So this is definitely, I think, over, and from my experience, definitely above average.
For me, it was incredibly supportive being at Ohio State, and not just with my teammates and the coaches, but you think about your support services with your academics. Just seeing a little ally sticker on someone's door made a huge difference for me, and I think that was the greatest part about being here, was that it was everywhere. I was getting it from all areas as far as support. So I think Ohio State is definitely above average.
Hi, first I just want to thank you so much for your time and sharing your stories and your advocacy with us. Really appreciate hearing from you and learning from you. As a faculty member here at Ohio State, wanting to touch base on your statement about needing more data on this population. As a cisgender ally, I wanted to seek your feedback about how can I appropriately and respectfully contribute to scholarship on this specific marginalized population that I do not identify with.
That's a great question. How much time do you have? I think, part of it is just asking that question and coming to different advocacy organizations in this space. There are a lot of groups. There's Athlete Ally, there's You Can Play, there's LGBT Sports Safe that we've spoken about a little bit previously, that are doing work on college campuses with teams and leagues, and we all have a sense of what is needed. I think a big thing is, we know anecdotally a lot of the discrimination that student athletes on college campuses face, but we don't have systematic data that really captures those instances of discrimination and all of the, for example, cases that have been filed across the country. There's also just an overall lack of data about the lived experience of LGBTQ athletes. So there are a lot of different pieces of research that could be done. We have more now than we did. And there's also some really interesting scholarship and has been on athlete activism, but definitely can talk to you for hours about research and data. So thank you for asking.
Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Sports and Society has some grant money for some research.
We do have some grant money. We should talk.
Yeah, for sure. Little selfless plug there.
Nice to meet you.
There's one more in the back. We'll come back. Do you have a question?
I was going to build off of that question as well, because some of us have done research in this area, and I wonder for the rest of the panel, what questions do you think still need to be explored? So kind of building off of that, we've heard a lot of your personal experiences, which is a great starting point. Beyond that, and beyond the quantitative data that can be collected, what else would you like to see done, or what questions do you have?
I think I would like to see more on how many athletes have not played their sport because they didn't feel included. I think that would be an alarming number, and I think it would spark a lot of people to question why these amazing athletes have decided not to play their sport. So I think that would be a really great place to begin or continue.
I would also add to that mental health statistics of LGBTQ athletes. That's a huge problem in just the general student population. However, it's not really focused on athletes, and I think as gay athletes, we go through this incredibly hard and tough experience during our time here, and I think having those numbers and having those statistics on what we actually go through could be beneficial in promoting a better environment and getting students the resources they need.
This is like a coaching question. I was wondering how beneficial you believe it would be for college and pro levels to have a Rooney Rule type rule in place for LGBTQ coaches that want to get involved. If you're familiar with the Rooney
Is that
Rule.
females coaching men's sports, or what's the name?
So an someone of minor
Oh, gotcha.
minority.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, being interviewed.
Yes.
Yeah, I think opportunity education has, definitely been a theme. I would definitely, I definitely think there's some benefits, and I think there's definitely some need for that. And I think, my sport right now is emerging, and I think that'd be a great opportunity to expose the sport to places. Typically right now, for me personally, our sport is not in your traditional inner city, or even, it's definitely a northeast sport and in pockets of Ohio even. You drive down 20 miles, there's not too much lacrosse. I also think the other, part what I thought the question was about, I do think, both ways. I think even females coaching men now is coming, short little in the tennis world. My wife actually coached some male athletes, in the under 15, I guess. And now you see, I think Andy Roddick or Andy Murray, one of the Andys, had a
a female coach. You know, I know it's not the major topic of this, but I think that's really, really important for people to see. And once you see it, I think you can definitely believe it and be it. So yeah, I would definitely be in favor for that rule, and also for, you know, females coaching men.
Just to kind of piggyback off of that, it's not directly related to your question, but I'm in a position of hiring coaches. And I'll tell you, I've interviewed people in this space, and people who are out and transparent during the interview process says something to me. And I've hired a coach because of it. I mean, there's obviously the tools that he brought to the table as well, but the comfortable factor that he felt to be himself was a big selling point for me. Again, he was out right away and just said, you know, here's my situation, and I appreciated it so much that he was willing to not get this job compared to not being himself. So it's a really, I would say it's really hard. We struggle with, if we were to have a new rule in college as well, we struggle because there's people during resumes that don't want to identify that way. I think it would be even harder in this space because even more people don't want to identify up front. But it's a great question.
So you talked earlier about the big five sports. So I guess my first comment is just that most of those sports are male sports, really, like football and baseball. And then I guess, like as a student athlete here at Ohio State, I just think it's important for us to remember like all the strides that maybe the smaller sports have taken. I'm part of the softball team here, and I know we have like a super like inclusive, welcoming environment with our sport, and I think maybe that hasn't always been around, but like now we have got there. I think it's important that we like celebrate those achievements.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks again for showing up and all the interesting questions and challenges and contributions you've made. We've talked about all these issues connected to sexuality and gender identity rather broadly. Based on your personal experiences and reflections, do you see things unique about sport and providing a setting to meet and encounter these challenges? Is there something unique about the setting of sport?
I think so, just because, you know, you're part of a team, like that's your family. You're traveling, you're doing everything together. You're in the weight room together, going through all kinds of craziness. So I think that's a huge factor as far as who you feel comfortable around. They may know if you're dating someone, and they're typically, you know, pretty supportive. So spending that amount of time with people, I think you're gonna get used to each other and support one another. And I think that can be helpful because, say a non-student athlete just comes to Ohio State and is in this big campus and doesn't know anyone, they're probably going to have a little bit harder time seeking out, you know, their allies and who they can trust and where they can go hang out and be themselves. So I think being an athlete is definitely an asset.
Yeah, and I think as a team, you go through like a lot of ups and downs. You win, you lose together, you laugh, you cry together, and there's not many environments like that. And the hardships that we all go through, we all want to help each other be the best teammates that we can. We want to put the best athletic ability forward. And I think for me, sexual orientation and gender identity, if you're hiding yourself, when I had to hear the wrong name played, I love scoring, but every time I would score, I would hear Haley, and it would just make me feel so bad inside. And everyone around me, my coaches, my teammates, wanted me to be the best athlete that I could and have the best clear mind. And being yourself, you don't have to have stuff in the back of your mind. And I think that creates like an open environment where you can talk about mental health, you can talk about your sexual orientation, you can talk about your gender identity. And everybody wants you to feel loved and supported so that you can also on a friendship level and a family level, but also that you can perform your best.
To add off that, I think our athletic potentials are maximized when we are authentic. And even in my own experience, once I was authentic with myself, I felt my athletic ability just soared, and I no longer had like a burden holding me back. And that's why I think it's just so important in sports to have a team where everybody's accepting and positive environments.
going off that a little bit, what, in your experience, maybe Joe, I'm looking a little more at you, but everybody please jump in. What are some specific things that coaches, teammates, administrators can do to help lift that burden off of you before you come out?
I think one of the biggest things is just making it apparent that this is a place where you can be safe and you can be yourself. So one thing for me that always stood out is past captains who were on the team, if there was any injustice going on or any homophobic comments, they would shut it down right in that moment. And I think that sends a clear message to the whole team of the culture we're trying to promote. So I think just leadership standing up for injustice and homophobia is a huge step to creating that environment and making people feel safe on a team.
Yeah, and I think talking about sexual orientation and stuff like that has been a dialogue that's been more frequent than transgender individuals. I think now the dialogue is being had, and I think trans policies are a great thing to start that dialogue if it's not necessarily there. Like there's a Canadian-wide youth sports. All Canadian universities now have a trans policy. There was a 56-school trans policy that was just adopted, I think, about a week ago. So that just shows they might not necessarily have had the conversation in the dressing room yet, but everybody knows now that transgender people are talked about, and that might have just started the initial dialogue. You might have not known what that was before you saw that policy, but now it's open, the door's open, and you can have conversations and be proactive and welcome a teammate that might be sitting there and they already identify as transgender, but they're scared to come out. And if you have a conversation team-wide, they might feel more comfortable.
Building off a little bit of what you said, I'm actually on the gymnastics team with Joey. I could talk about for days how great a kid that is. But being a leader on my team and other people who are on athletic teams, what are small steps that we can take, like on a daily basis, to create that environment that you're talking about? Like, what are small things we can do every day, where we're reminding people that this is a safe space? Like, what are little things that I could do on my team, and what could other people do on other teams to make sport a better place, make this university a better place, different things like that. So just little things that I could be doing, we could be doing just on a daily basis.
I would say asking the normal questions, I guess, you dating anybody, or, those basic questions you probably would have with your teammate anyway. I think those little conversations, those connections, and everyone likes feedback, everyone likes compliments. We like to say on our team, you give one compliment, hopefully you get two back. That's not the goal, but the more you give, the more you get. So, and then maybe you just open the door for a conversation that, a teammate may or may not have with you, but at least you kind of put that olive branch out there. So I think just normalizing those conversations, I think makes it, that time, if it comes up, a lot more easier.
Yeah, I think going on that, gender neutral terms, not assuming anybody's straight, not assuming anybody's gay. Ask, do you have a partner? How's your relationship going? Or if you're addressing the team, don't say boys, you say, all right, team, let's do this. It's just little things that you might not necessarily think twice about, but somebody that's transgender, I know that every time somebody was like, ladies, let's do this, I was like, I'm not a lady, I don't want to do this. So it's just, you have to think about those types of things, and that's something that you could do every day, is to just think of more inclusive terms and think about how you address things and think about how you talk about things.
Yeah, I think also, this might be an obvious point, but just having a zero tolerance approach to any sort of homophobic or transphobic remarks that are made if people, are using gay, for instance, in a derogatory way, or saying other things that could be interpreted as slurs. I think it's important that amongst the team, and then also among the leadership, that a standard is set sort of from the top down and throughout, that is unacceptable, and that we're going to treat people with dignity and respect regardless of who they are.
Yeah, I think something that's really important that me and Alec always try to do is to create a culture where that language isn't accepted, and to have that zero tolerance for any slurs being said, and if a slur is said, address it on the spot in front of the team so people get that culture and they get what we're about, and the mistake won't be made. And instead of getting mad that somebody's making a comment, take the opportunity to educate them rather than lashing out at them, because a lot of hate just comes from ignorance. So when you take the opportunity to educate someone instead of getting mad at them or lashing out at them, it's way more effective, and it's a better way to spread a positive culture.
Absolutely, and remembering too, on the education piece is like, and you said this before, we're all constantly learning, and to have patience with folks and understanding that part of being an ally in whatever respect is that ally is an active word, right? So you're constantly learning new things, new language, and to understand that we're all gonna make mistakes as allies, and that's okay, but the important thing is to apologize, move forward, and try to learn something from the situation and learn from the people that are trying to teach you and really listen.
This question is to you, Sean. There's such a high score on that athlete ally quality index. Has this increased the amount of transfer student athletes to the university, or has it made any effect or change?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that the first published, we were 62% score. When it gets republished, will be much higher. So we've put an emphasis on it. We publicize what we do more. So I would hope that, yes, it does. I don't have a specific number of that, but we are trying to position ourselves that if someone is looking at schools to go to, that this is a safe space to be in. Thanks.
I don't know if this is a weird question, but we've talked a lot about the gender binary and how it kind of constricts us as a society, especially in sports. Do you see a future where we have maybe teams for like transgender people, or would that be seen as excluding them from what's already there? Like, do you see that being a thing in the future?
Yeah, I think for hockey, there's a gay hockey league in Toronto that gay men and transgender people, anybody can really join it, but it's called the Gay Hockey League, and I don't think that they feel like that's segregation in the way, like it just creates a safe environment. I'm not sure if I would want to play in a transgender league, but it's a personal preference. So like I think if it's there, if the option's there, like if there's a unisex bathroom, I feel really great about that. Like you just have that option. So yeah, I think like definitely like in the grassroots, like younger ages and stuff, like you could have more co-ed, you could have a transgender, you could have a non-binary thing. I don't see a problem in that personally. Like I don't know if anybody feels differently about that, but I think that would be a safe space for somebody.
I think what's going to be really interesting to see is, we now have a generation of kids, Generation Z, that 50% don't identify within a gender binary. So what does that mean when those kids start to interact with sports? And so I think that's a great question, and I think, again, I don't have a great answer to that, but sport is and has always been on a collision course with society, so we're going to definitely see more and more of questions like yours coming up.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, like, you shouldn't, like, if there's a transgender league, you shouldn't only be allowed to play in the transgender league. It's just like, it would just be like an option kind of thing. I think you can't close things off on people, but to have it there, like, I don't see it being anything.
I kind of have an interesting follow-up question to that. So I was in the national board of an organization that with 13,000 gay athletes, and it's a primary LGBT organization. And we struggle with trying to figure out how to fit straight people into our organization. Because as we continue to grow, they want to be part of this organization. And so we've actually now, at our national tournament, I put in a requirement that you have to have an LGBT person on your team in order to play with us, because there are so many straight people that have wanted to come join us. So it's kind of the opposite.
I guess I sort of have two questions. First one is for Coach Venichanos. I grew up less than an hour away from the University of Maryland campus up in Frederick, Maryland, so first off, go Terps. And second off, I was probably graduating kindergarten when we graduated. It was 2003, right? Yep. So right on, entering kindergarten. So how, when you were a player, how did you notice the culture of LGBTQ acceptance within your sport? How do you think that's changed and how it is today, especially with your perspective change going from being a player to being a coach?
Yeah, just kind of hearing your story a little bit. I think our community was always pretty, I don't want to say leading, but pretty open. My high school coach was married to a woman. My college coach was married to 2 women. We went over to her house. She was around. I had to reflect back. I think, I didn't come out until after college, but I always felt like I probably could have earlier with that, I guess, atmosphere. And it was not even, I guess, a thought. Maybe it was thought for me, but it was very open and flowing. I would say you almost, not say expected it, but it was not even a pause. It was, oh, she's with a girl, or she's with a guy, or sometimes she's with both, and that was it. It was kind of this conversation we probably had 15, maybe years ago. Our coach was always, very, not so much ladies not bring it in. Now I kind of am more aware of that. I say Bucks bring it in. Those are the things I kind of hear more. But I think it was open, and I do think some other sports come to us sometimes and talk about kind of that openness. But I've been really fortunate, and I try to give that environment here. And I think hopefully, it does kind of be a little bit more normalized.
Okay, thank you for that. And my other question, I don't know if there's any other Canadians on the panel, but I guess it's primarily for Mr. Brown. Being that hockey of the Big Four televising commercial sports in the United States, hockey is definitely by far the most binational with such a high level of visibility in both Canada and the United States. How do you feel the 2 nations sort of background of the sport has influenced the visibility and the acceptance of LGBTQ youth and athletes within the sport of hockey as a whole?
Yeah, I think in terms of, I would break it down in women's hockey and men's hockey. Like, I think that the visibility of gay women and LGBTQ presence in women's hockey across the nation, like the team captain of Team USA just married another Canadian Olympian, so like they were against each other all the time, rivals, and then they ended up getting married. And that was, I actually saw it come up when I opened my phone. It was one of the things that comes up like a top story. So it says a lot about hockey, that it cross-nation, cross-border. And so yeah, it's definitely inspired a lot of young kids growing up in that respect. The men's side is a little bit different. There's no gay male hockey player that has come out yet. But I see these You Can Play games. I see people stating their message and saying, like, if you can play, you can play. Each team really has had a thing that has come out, a commercial that has come out, and they play it during their Pride nights. And I'm sure they play it other nights as well. And wearing the Pride tape on their stick, or having rainbow numbers on their jersey. It's creating a safe environment for the fans to really feel included. Every time I'm at one of those games, I just feel the energy of these fans. But there needs to be a shift, obviously, because statistically there has to be a gay player in the NHL. There has to be. And they still don't feel welcome to come out. So I don't know what men's hockey has to do differently, but there is strides in the right direction. But yeah, but the whole of Canada and US, I think it's really interesting to see how that sport can stay popular in both. Thank you.
I had a question, but I think Harrison talked about it a little bit in terms of Pride Nights. I was wondering, a lot of MLB stadiums and hockey, I believe now, have had their Pride Nights. I was wondering how you think Ohio State can really adapt those nights. I'm not sure if Ohio State has them yet, but how it can benefit fans in the stadium and just the players who are playing in those games.
We have had some. Again, I would say we're not there for sure. I'll be the first one to say it. I know our hockey teams do the You Can Play videos. Some other sports. I've been at other institutions where we've done it with high-profile sports. When I was at Colgate, we did something with men's basketball. So we're not there yet, but it's great to hear that Harrison is involved in this. And I always worry of, again, we don't have an out male student athlete in a hockey program that I know of here. But again, we play that video at hockey. So again, what message are we sending to that community? And I always worry about that. So something I would love to follow up with you on, again, of navigating those waters.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's tough because you don't want tokenism, and you don't want it to feel forced. You don't want it to feel false. And there's a fine line sometimes where people can just be like, well, they're just trying to jump in on this rainbow bandwagon right now. And it's difficult. It's difficult to navigate those waters, and it's good that you guys are thinking of this before and making sure that you want to do it genuinely. And that's the conversation that people need to have. How can we do this genuinely? Not how can we have a game. How can we genuinely promote a safe environment for an LGBTQ athlete, a fan, a hockey player, a coach? You need to think about it in that approach.
Sorry, I was actually just going to share. So Ohio State was one of the earliest colleges to adopt that you could play video. I mean, it was like 5 years ago, started with hockey only, and then they expanded to all the other sports. And they've been doing that for 4 or 5 years. To your prior question about what's happening in men's sports, so I'm an openly gay attorney for the Columbus Blue Jackets, and I can just state there's little things with choices in words that we've been talking about that contribute to men not coming out. For example, when a new player joins our team, we send them a form to give us all their information. We ask for their wife or their girlfriend. That's on the form. What's your wife or girlfriend's name? In our locker room hallway, which Alice is familiar with, you walk down this hall, and on the left is the wives lounge. And I would share that that's probably not uncommon throughout the league to just have that expectation, right? And there's so much catching up to do just think of that simple thing. It could be the family lounge, and we can ask for your spouse or partner on the form. Just people don't have, their antennas aren't up to those simple things, so they just think that's normal, it's no big deal. But that's where allies can make a difference. It's just having your antenna up, look for those opportunities to change your words to non-gender specific words. It's pretty simple. I mean, that's like the first step. Like if I applied anywhere for a job and they ask for my spouse or partner's name, I'm like, oh, they already get it. And I probably give them too much credit. that can be one of your first indicators. And when you're LGBTQ, you're always looking for warning signs or safe signs. Everywhere you walk, every room you enter, it's am I safe here or not? And there's so many little things that switch that up or down. So I would add that that's where the opportunity is.
Thank you for sharing. It's amazing.
For all of you that are part of this LGBTQ community, do you think, because a lot of you have spoken about how when you saw people come out in the media, it was kind of a source of empowerment for you and a source of hope. Do you think there's gonna be a time where it's no longer gonna be in the media? It's gonna be that's completely do you think there will be a time where that's just normal? They're not even gonna talk about it when it happens. Do you think that'll be a thing? Or do you hope for that to be a thing?
Yeah, I hope so. I think that's the goal. I think what makes us look for those role models is the need for them. And I hope one day there won't be a need for them and they'll be right next to you on your team and it won't be a necessity. So I think that's the goal.
Yeah, like the best reaction is no reaction. So yeah, definitely, I do see that. Like if a gay woman comes out on a hockey team, there's no reaction. It's the same thing. So it's just you want that across the board. You want that across the board, definitely.
So one more question.
Just a quick question for the coach on the panel. How do you handle players who come to you who are struggling with their sexual orientation, or have you experienced that?
You know, I actually haven't. I actually had a good conversation with one of my alum. It was kind of you just live your life and you know your role model. You don't really know until 5 years later sometimes, and you get that email, you get that conversation. She came out to her parents, and her parents said, kind of like that no reaction, and they kind of used my family as an example. And they said, we know I guess there's a fear sometimes of parents, I don't know, maybe my parents personally, that they wanted their kids to have a family, have their kids to be part of this wedding and this family, and they think sometimes that you can't have it. So she said to me, I told my parents, I'm like, good job, I gave her a little pep talk because I'm a coach, it was great. And she said, yeah, and I definitely, there wasn't much reaction, and they use you and your family as an example. If Lex has 3 kids and a wife, and and that helped her with her family. Does that make sense? So again, hopefully it's a little bit less of reaction, but I thought that was pretty neat that you just live your life and then people see that. And I had conversations with people in my, athletic department or just socially about how we started a family. And that's, conversations. I had a conversation with somebody that, almost 8 years ago. So those are the things now, I like to pay it forward, and that's one of the big things we do here. So it wasn't so much struggles, it was almost kind of the part 2 of it is kind of how do we, maybe, take that next step. So I thought I would have more, but I haven't. So that's hopefully coming from 5 or 10 years ago from high schools by the time they come here.
So a couple questions for me just to kind of to wrap this up, because I'm cognizant of everybody's time. So speaking about that, so the youth community right now it's challenging, and I would say the mental health side of things, especially for youth in this community, is really, really hard. What would your message be to youth coaches, and then more specific to what Lex mentioned, parents? I see a lot of folks here that are either parents or will be parents at some point. What's the messaging this panel wants to tell the audience in that episode?
For me, I'm fortunate enough to be a part of a department that's incredibly diverse. I think being a woman in athletic administration is different. You walk into, you see a lot of guys like you, no offense. It's just the norm. But it's great, when we get all kinds of parents that come in for various issues and they see our department and they're shocked that, my boss is a white gay woman, or a black gentleman's on our staff as well. And it's just, they're shocked at the diversity. So I think that kind of gets them thinking, like, whoa, there's a little bit different look here. And then obviously we're able to help them out. But I think that goes for our parents and also the kids when they see us and how they communicate with us and feeling comfortable. I think having that different look-like people makes it easier for the kids to feel like they can identify with someone, or they might get me a little bit more. And I think that's definitely been helpful for some of the kids.
I think it definitely has been mentioned before, but I think it's really important that coaches and parents and any community leaders or folks who are teachers who are interacting with students really set a standard that diversity and inclusion is something that is to be valued and sought after, and that dignity and respect need to be afforded to everyone. And so that's regardless of if anyone on your team happens to be LGBT or not. And this also, sport is an opportunity, I think, for connections and empathy and compassion to be developed across difference. It has played that role in society in forming our own culture over time, and I think on an individual, team-by-team level, it also does that kind of work for us. And so I think it's really incumbent upon leaders who are facilitating all this, especially among youth and especially in high school settings, for them to make it really clear that regardless of who people are and how they present and interact with you, as long as they're being respectful and as long as we're treating each other well, that's all that matters, and we accept people as they come to us.
So in closing for me, I just want to give you each maybe a space to close it yourself. Like, what do you want the message to be that these amazing people that came to listen to you all speak about this, what do you want them to take away? What's your closing statement?
Just always be supportive. You never know how it's going to impact someone. Just the smallest interaction can mean so much to a stranger. So anytime you can interact and be positive and be respectful, you can have a positive impact on someone's life.
Yeah, I think for me, what I would want each one of you to take out of this is something that you can do. You don't have to be an athlete. You don't have to you can just be a regular Joe. And I think things that you can take into your everyday. Gender neutral terms, not assuming, and just being a great ally. Just being a good person, respect, dignity, and just do what you can to make this world a better place.
I think I said good love before, but I also think just listening and just being there. Sometimes you're not sure what you say or how to say it. Just listening sometimes just enough.
I think first I want to thank you all for being in this room and just remind you that each and every one of us has a role to play in the LGBTQ sports movement, but just in the broader fight for equality in this country, and never lose sight of that. And if you learned something interesting tonight, tell a friend, share something you've learned, start a conversation.
there might not be any in this room, but if there is, and if you are someone who is struggling with your sexuality, know that you are worthy of everything in this world and you are valuable. And although it may seem as a monstrous burden, one day you're going to realize it's an incredible blessing, and it's what makes you unique. It's what separates you from other people, and it's what allows your character to develop. And in no way is your sexual orientation determinant of your athletic ability.
Yeah, and I also want to thank everyone for showing up and for OSU facilitating this and putting it all together, and to emphasize the value of conversation and having difficult discussions about issues that we might not all be familiar with or on the same page about. It really is the best tool that we have to create a society worth living in, short of resorting to barbarism and all sorts of other horrifying things. Conversation really is where it's at, and we can't forget that, especially when the conversation is difficult and it's about things that, are politically charged and emotionally charged. So I really do thank everyone for showing up today and having the courage to ask questions, even when it's, maybe you've never even thought about the appropriate way to phrase them before. It shows a lot of courage, and it's what we need in order to hopefully create a society ultimately worth living in.
For sure. Closing for me, I just want to thank all of you for your time tonight, the distance you may have traveled, your energy that you relayed to these folks and to us, and your passion, again, to move this conversation forward. It takes allies like you to share your stories. Again, the difficult times some of you have probably been through, I commend you for that, and your courage and what you have done in this space. Again, I had a question down here of, who are some of your role models? Well, I hope these people see you as role models, as I do, and moving this conversation forward. So thank you all for what you do, who you are, and for being here tonight. My second part would be to you, to understand here at Ohio State, whether you're a student, a faculty member, just a supporter, realize that there are people on this campus, whether you know them or you don't, that there are safe spaces for you. Whether you're a student athlete, a coach, a normal student. I'm an ally for this space. I have a wife and a child. I don't live this life, but again, realize that there are people like me in this community that are here for you. So again, Billy talked a lot about mental health. If someone in this room knows somebody that's struggling, you're struggling yourself, look me up. I'm on the athletic website. Shoot me an email. I'm happy to get together with you. I will give you a hug. Not figuratively, but literally. Again, we'll have a conversation. I may not be an expert in this space, but I know how to get in touch with all these folks. So again, understand that you're not alone. We're all in this together, whether we live this space or we don't. There are allies in this community for you. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you all for coming. I hope that you found this just as inspirational, and I'm ready to do more. So I hope we can all continue this conversation. We certainly will with Sports and Society and many other conversations to continue. Please follow us on the web, it's sportsandsociety.osu.edu. We'll have a lot more programming coming for the rest of the school year, and we're so grateful you're here. Please have some cookies, be safe driving home, and another big round of applause.